Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that very warm welcome and introduction. And on behalf of the Chairman and the Organizing Committee of the 6th International Conference on Education and Social Sciences, I would like to join the Chairman in inviting you very warmly to this conference. And I believe that this is going to be very fruitful for every one of us here. And I look forward to chairing two of the sessions today, sessions 1 and 3, and also to be participating in other sessions and enjoying the rest of the conference. So again, distinguished educators and fellow learners, lifelong learners, welcome. So what we are going to be talking about today in this first keynote is about the subject of project-based learning. If I may just have a quick show of hands as to how many of you are familiar with this concept of project-based learning? Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. How many of you have actually practiced project-based learning? Very good. Thank you so much. So there is some scope for some learning and for sharing. And please bear with me as we go through many concepts in this brief presentation. And we will start by giving an outline of the presentation itself. First of all, I'll be introducing the subject itself. And I want to also remind us that there is a globalization of education that is taking place at a rapid pace today. So we have education going transnationally across countries and in joint operations around the world. Then there's global shortages of skills and employability. In spite of this, the explosion of education around the world is not able to keep pace with the great need for employability, that is employment and skilled training. Then I'm also going to talk about three concepts here: projects, projectization, and projectification. They're related concepts, and I'm going to introduce the idea there because project management is at the core of project-based learning, and it's very important that we understand that. Then I'm also going to talk about the principles of project-based learning and do a literature review of 4 research streams that impact this model that I've come up with based on the fieldwork on project-based learning in 8 technology projects of senior design students at Drexel University. And I'm going to come up with this accelerated project-based learning model composed of 4 different streams of literature and models from those. And finally, I'll summarize and present you the accelerated PBL model, or project-based learning model for higher education, and see how it can be applied around the world in different parts. So we see that higher education is in the vortex of accelerating globalization today, which means that more and more institutions are adopting higher education in increasing numbers as literacy literally explodes around the world. And then the 21st century is spawning rapid technological innovation. It is not just education, but technology is going ahead at a very rapid pace. And the younger generation are able to keep up with the Z generation, they're able to keep up with it, but the older generation have to play catch up. This rapid diffusion of innovation, or DOI, needs to be harnessed, because when innovation is taking place, technology is exploding, we can't just stand by idly. They have to be harnessed for the betterment of mankind and for our faster learning. So project-based learning enables focused innovation capture. So the importance of the project-based learning is that there is a very practical way of absorbing this rapid knowledge that is exploding around the world. It is rooted in project management principles and practice, and I'm going to speak a little bit about that because that's my major area of research. Now, self-directed learning is an intrinsic essential of PBL. That means you cannot have project-based learning or learning in the future, for the future generations, without self-directed learning included. Change leadership gives momentum and direction for PBLs. That means we have to be, typically people are resistant to change, but we have to find a way to have this leadership that encourages and embraces change. So acceleration of existing PBL models need project management, self-directed learning, and change leadership efficiencies in order to make it work. Now, this research that I conducted develops a composite accelerated model of PBL. So this model can serve as a catalyst for globalization of education. So one step at a time and one institution at a time. So we'll see how that can be done and how you can relate to this. Now, the first thing I want to look at is that there is a global shortage of skills. Can we just get this lights, please? Because it's hard for people to read. We can just get the light, turn this light off, please, for the screen. Yeah, it's too bright. Okay. Oh, that's all right. So I just want to quickly pass through because we only have a couple of these graphs here. These graphs, 2018 talent shortage survey. From there, we have this idea that there is a tremendous shortage of talent, that you can just see this wave going, but it has been increasing in 2018. So 2019 is going to be even higher. So about 67% of shortage is there for actual technological skills and labor. And we see that across the sizes of companies. These are small companies and these are large companies. We see that larger companies suffer a lot more than smaller companies and entrepreneurial ventures. Now, internationally, if you take a look at the map of the world, we have color coding here for different countries and different blocks of continents. So we can see that countries as diverse as India, Switzerland, and Argentina, they have the greatest shortage of technological manpower today. That's very surprising. And so we have a real challenge to try to meet some of these shortages and vacuums around the world. And it's very hard to predict which country is going to have that. I found it very surprising, for instance, that China seems to be able to cope with the technological manpower that they need at their pace of growth. Now, we're looking at this diffusion of innovation. And in diffusion of innovation, we have a progression where you see that innovation progresses through persuasion, and then its adoption, and then finally it moves on and expands into the environment. So the problem with innovation is that a lot of people who innovate are unable to really allow this innovation to see the light of day because of financial reasons or because of lack of encouragement, lack of equipment and technological support. Many innovations really die. We don't even hear about it. Now, a few of them do make it into the light of day, and then the world comes to know about it, like, the Apple, Steve Jobs, the way it came out as an explosive innovation that's really wrapped around the world today. So there is something called the diffusion of innovation. It moves gradually and sometimes erratically, but there is a lot of innovation going on today, and we need to find a way to harness this innovation. And one of the best ways we can do that is through project-based learning, the hands-on learning, right? Now we see that the underlying principles of project management, project-based learning, self-directed learning, and change leadership. So we have basic underlying principles here. Now in project management, it's a methodological approach where you have a temporary organization which is constrained by cost, time, and quality, and it has to start and finish within a short span of time. Then project-based learning is where this project management approach is used as the core, and it's an inquiry-based learning. That means the learners are asking questions, and there's a very close relationship between the teachers and the learners to a point where they both ultimately become learners, co-learners together. So a lot of hands-on involved there. Then inquiry-based learning, now self-directed learning is also an inquiry-based learning methodology whereby the student or the learner it takes a lot of initiative, there's a lot of self-discipline, there is a lot of encouragement from peers and so on. So that eventually leads to changes, and that's why change leadership becomes very important. Now, people naturally resist change. Now, if we were to come to the same room again and again today, you'll be amazed half of you will sit in the same seats because we resist change, right? So we have to find ways to make people change, but it has to be done very gradually in a certain way, and that requires specialized change leadership in order to make that happen. And then again, I want to just compare quickly projects. Now, projects are time and resource limited entities that are meant to be carrying out the strategy of the organization in a very, very short period of time with resource constraints. Now, projectization is the strategic approach of a company that produces projects, or spawns projects. So that's projectization. So many companies today, because of competition around them in the environment, they're producing projects left, right, and center. And those projects are actually forwarding the company's strategic goals. Now, projectification is one step further, where more and more companies become projectized, and we see that more and more projects are being spawned around the society. So we call it the projectification of society or the environment. So therefore, the overall impact is that there is more and more companies are starting to manage by projects. That means as soon as we talk about progress today, or some strategy, some competition happening, or some new innovation that we want to, innovative product we want to launch, immediately we are talking about managing by projects. We want to create projects, establish a good leadership there, and then have these projects produce these new innovative products as quickly as possible with the most efficient combination of resources. Now, this study is conceptually rooted in project practice. So in this study, we're talking about the project management as the core of project-based learning. So now this is a quick idea here for us to see that project management is one of the fastest growing professions, or profession within a profession in the world today, because of this competition again, where pyramidal organizations that were very slow at one time, they're becoming flatter and flatter as more and more projects are being released from the companies, sometimes even internationally and in a distributed manner around the world. So we see that industries such as in the military establishment and business, healthcare, engineering, information technology, event planning, science, construction. These are some examples of a variety of industries that are launching projects today. And so project management has become a very, very important subject and a profession today. And there's something called the Project Management Professional Certification, which is the #1 certification today in the world. If you can get that, that's going to open doors in terms of employment, in terms of skills in project management and project leadership. Now, this is the definition of mine on projects. So I think we still need to get the lights for people to be able to read. Are you able to read it from the back there? Okay. All right. So I'll just let me just read it quickly. A project is a complex, temporary organization that is purposefully created, organized by an entity to make sure that both external and internal stakeholders are impacted by the project, and they impact the project also. And it's resource constrained, non-routine, non-repetitive tasks. That means projects are very unique ventures. They're not repeated over and over again. And they are non-routine, and they're resource constrained because there are so many projects that are being launched by the company. So each project does not have unlimited resources. There's competition for resources, so they're very resource limited. They use it very wisely in a very economical way. And then they're bounded by time, cost, and quality parameters. That's a definition. There are lots of definitions of projects, but this is a definition that I came up with a few years ago. Now you can see this, that a typical project is a flat pancake-shaped organization. It's not a pyramid where you have hierarchies of people and people reporting to each other up and down the scale of the hierarchy, because there is no time for that. Everybody is down to business, and you have a project manager in the middle there who is just one among equals. Everybody is an expert in some area or the other. So you have all these teams here, and you see that the project manager is actually basically is the orchestrator, like a conductor of an orchestra. So everything is going on fine here. There's a lot of interaction within the groups, within the teams, and between the teams, but the project manager is able to keep a finger on every pie here. Okay, so that's the and then we have all these teams here. So this is a typical project which is like flat. It is not where people are pulling rank. Everybody is just working together as respectfully as professional equals. And then we see this is a typical sequence of project phases. So you have an initiation phase, and then you have planning, and then design, execution, and finally closing of the project. And then there is the controlling arm here, which is actually creates a closed loop. So there are some loops here you can see, whereby you keep on refining the planning, because we don't have enough information at this stage about the project. And then you also refine the design and the execution. So we just keep going. So there's an interaction among all of these. So overall, there's the control of all of these, control and monitoring of all these activities, planning, design, and execution. And finally, when all that is done, then the project begins to be shut down and starts to close, and eventually it will be launched and produced and then handed over to the client. Again, here we talk about projectization that was mentioned earlier. Here you see this pyramidal company that is spawning a lot of projects, and in the process of doing that, something happens to this company. This company's pyramid becomes more and more flat, and eventually it becomes something like a mound, whereby you have all these projects being produced and distributed and accomplishing, and then they start, finish the work, and then they're closed down, and then more projects keep coming. So that's what happened. This is projectization. Projectification is an extension of that, as I mentioned. So here's a company that has all these projects that they're spawning, and then they have more projects coming on, and then from this there are other companies coming, and then you see the whole society filled with associations and agencies and companies, non-profit, profit, government, all these agencies and companies, they're all an organization, they're all producing projects. So the whole society becomes projectified. So we call it the projectification of society. Now that gives a very good background for what project management is about, and what is projectization of companies that produce these projects, and projectification of society that become infused with projects all over. It becomes a buzzword. Everybody is talking about the word, using the word project. Now this is project-based learning, and this is one of the many models you'll find out in the literature. So here what is happening is the teacher is encouraging questioning, planning and researching, and the student is involved in creating, improving, and presenting. So, and finally the student has to present the material, but then you see there's a strong interaction between teacher and student to a point where they both become fellow learners. And that practical hands-on aspect is what makes project-based learning very special and very, very productive, and where innovation can be harnessed and produced and creatively impacting, and it will creatively impact society. Now, self-directed learning is again another inquiry-based method of learning, where there is self-motivation, and then there is self-management. What's it? Let me just, yeah. Can someone read this for me? Yeah, self-modification and self-monitoring. I'm sorry. So I want to make sure I don't mix up the two. Okay, so basically what's happening, you see the word self occurring in all of these. That means it's like self-managed. There's a lot of initiative on the part of the learner, and this is a little more description of each of these. That initiation, the initiative that the learner has to take is really key. At one time, it was just a matter of students just sitting in a classroom, and the lecturer would just keep speaking, or the teacher will keep speaking, and then they keep absorbing this knowledge in a way that is not very efficient actually. But here, by doing this hands-on training and taking responsibility and accountability for their own learning, they become better learners, and they're able to produce more, and their learning sticks for a long time, and they are able to be more creative also. So now this is about change leadership. Now there's a researcher by name Cotter who introduced the idea of change leadership, and implementing change. He saw that there is something called you have to first unfreeze the idea of getting stuck in the modus operandi or the status quo all the time. So you first of all establish a sense of urgency for change. So we need to change. We have to make the change. Something is happening in our environment. And you form a coalition, and then create a new vision and communicate that vision to the people around, the people who can be impacted by that, who need to know about it. So it's unfreezing. So once we do that, and then everybody gets loosened up and they become psychologically and physically and personally ready for change, they see the utility of change, then you can move to the next stage, which is empowering others by removing the barriers, create and reward short-term wins, because you can't make an overnight change. So just make short-term wins and then show the praise and appreciation, so people will start slowly moving towards the different stage. So, and then consolidate, reassess and adjust, and then finally what happens is we reinforce the changes, and that's refreezing. So from unfreezing, you have this movement or a fluid state, and then you sort of refreeze, and you keep doing that over and over again, and eventually you see that people who have been used to one kind of work or one approach to work in a certain environment become completely changed. Like for instance, if you see like 10 years ago, what was a typical office like? You had old computers, you have IBM computers and so on. Today we have everybody using laptops and iPhones and other methodologies and techniques and technology. So that change took place over a period of time. In some cases, that change has to take place very, very quickly. To do that, you have to go through these stages. So it doesn't happen just overnight and accidentally. So it's a very deliberate effort. Now for this research itself, the purpose was to study the roles of SDL, that's self-directed learning, project management, change leadership, and project-based learning, implementation of those, and then to study change leadership in overcoming the resistance to change that we all have as human beings. To study the roles of self-directed learning, project management, and CL in PBL acceleration. So how do we accelerate the project management, the project-based learning that we see today? And then to propose an accelerated PBL model with these three ingredients built into it, which is self-directed learning, we just talked about, project management with all the efficiencies, and then the change leadership with the effectiveness of moving from one stage to another stage and making those changes. The significance of the research is that PBL is of direct significance because the diffusion of innovation is very, very important, and it cannot again happen by accident. So there has to be a certain methodology, a certain approach to making sure that the changes that are taking place and the innovation is being absorbed very rapidly. Now PBL is infused by SDL, PM and CL to make a robust working model that really works, that is practicable. And then the accelerated PBL model will help close the employment gap. We talked earlier when we saw those graphs about the huge employment gap that is there around the world and within companies right here, even in Dubai, I'm sure, and in your countries, when you go back, you find these employment gaps. And the question is how to fill those gaps in a way that is meaningful, that can make the companies competitive. And for that, we need this kind of rapid, accelerated PBL model kind of approach to rapidly absorb new learning and innovation. So this is why the accelerated PBL model will help to inspire lifelong learning. And now, tomorrow, the day after, and in the future, lifelong learning is going to become absolutely part and parcel of society, of civilization. It is not something that you just learn for a while, get a degree and go on. Now, if you just take your CVs, when you go for jobs tomorrow, maybe 5 years from now, they're going to ask about what you have been learning in the last 5 years. Show your certificates, show that you have been a lifelong learner. That's going to be very, very critical. Now, just a philosophical sense, I'm going to go through this very quickly. The paradigm is that of pragmatism through mixed methodology study. So we have, there is interviewing, which is like more primary studies, and then also with a scale and a questionnaire that is used, SDLRS questionnaire that is used for this research. The ontology is relativist in that truth is constructed by humans and situated within a social context. So we absorb truth, in this case, in a social context. The epistemology is socially constructed phenomena through the lived experience of the participating subjects in the research. So this is just this more academic and research-oriented statements that you make in any paper. Now, this the problem that had to be resolved. The problem was to investigate how to accomplish and accelerate diffusion of innovation that we talked about. In technology-intensive higher education projects through project-based learning, competencies, and infused by self-directed learning skills, and then project management efficiencies and change leadership effectiveness towards a composite dynamic model. That's what we're aiming for. And we just see a couple of figures here. Now, this is what has been happening. Overview of the research methodology, the research questions. There are 3 research questions. We'll look at that shortly. And then for the first one, the SDLRS, the survey was used. It's about 20 or 30 years old, but it's been very effective. And then this is a quantitative survey of 30 students who are senior design students who are studying bachelor's in technology, especially in engineering technology. They're very brilliant students. I'll just show you the research they've been doing or the actual projects they've been working on. The instruments employed were the SDLRS survey with 58 items, with 3 open-ended questions that had to be actually analyzed using textual software. So we have SPSS software and fact analysis for the quantitative aspect, and then of course MS Excel for the data itself, and then NVivo was used for the textual analysis of those 3 straightforward open-ended questions. And then question 2 was understanding the practice of PBL, SDL, PM, and CL through interviews. So I interviewed 6 students and 6 advisors in depth. That is qualitative. And then the third question was understanding of acceleration. Now that we have this a model, an approximate model, how do we accelerate the project-based learning through interviews? So I talked to people like these 6 students and 6 advisors. So there were 12 semi-structured and 1 one-on-one interviews with 6 questions each. So I had that done with 6 students and the advisors for those groups of students. Then the transcriptions were coded and then analyzed using a software called Leximancer out of the University of Queensland in Australia. So we can see that there are 2 phases here. The first was quantitative using the SDLRS-A instrument with 58 items. And then there were 30 senior design students. And then they were also interviewed with 3 open-ended questions. So this was qualitative, this is quantitative, qualitative. So you have the mixed methods. That is a phase 1. So after I analyzed all of those, I identified 6 student project leaders and also 6 capstone project advisors for each of those groups of students, or 8 groups of students. So this was all qualitative because it's absolutely fresh area, so there's no way to do it any other way. So I had to actually talk to them and they create this questionnaire and talk to the students and the advisors and try to find out how the project-based learning could be accelerated. And then that's when I came to know that I had to use these other models together as a composite model. So these are the 3 research questions that we just went through. What is the extent to which self-directed learning skills were applied by final year engineering technology students in project-based learning as determined quantitatively through the self-directed learning readiness scale or SDLRS scale. Okay. And then the second question was, how are self-directed learning skills, project management efficiencies, and change leadership effectiveness applied in the implementation of technology-infused projects? The third was, what are the best practices to buttress a model to accelerate project-based learning competencies by employing self-directed learning skills, project management efficiencies, and change leadership effectiveness? So we see those terms repeating over and over again, but there's a reason for it. Now, in this research, as you can see, the 4 research streams are looked at from the literature to see what is the state of the art in terms of research advancement in these areas. So we see all of these, the 4 research streams for project management, project-based learning, self-directed learning, and change leadership. So I went into those to understand the phenomena better. So came up with this model. It's a model of accelerated project-based learning. So you have all those 4 models, sub-models included in those. So again, we see the overlap among those. Eventually you have this little triple clover here. So this is hard to read. Basically, this is the survey the survey instrument with all those items. There's self-management, group of questions or items for self-management, and then you had for learning itself, and then you had self-control. So these are the three areas that were looked at, and it was found that the students really wanted from this, that the students really want, these are the 8 projects, and you had a variety of very interesting topics that were taken by the students. Again, the responses were grouped, and it was found that the students really were eager to learn and to apply their learning. And it was also seen that they were still wanting to be taught by somebody. So there is kind of a controversy or dichotomy between the two. But they agreed through the personal interviews that they would like to go hands-on, they would like to speed up their research, and they'd like to have the project-based learning approach. So this was the way the interview was done, by first of all socializing, and then having the initial interview, and then going back and cleaning up and fine-tuning, and then following up, and then finally making the reflection and compressing all the ideas and crystallizing the ideas to create this model. So the model, you can see you have the project management, you have change leadership and self-directed learning, and project-based learning is in the middle as the state of the art. So when you combine all of these, surrounded by the innovative technology environment, we see that this was really a very practical way to approach it when we tried it with another group of students in the next session. So I just wanted to summarize the contents of what we have been looking through, but the main thing is that the research questions were answered in a way that made it clear that project-based learning is definitely here to stay, and that the best way to approach it, it can be very slight because there are many models of project-based learning around, but without infusion of self-directed learning, change leadership, and also project management methodologies, it is not going to go far. It's not going to be as effective as it could be. So now, in conclusion, there is a rise in global demand for education, and we'll see that every day as we go back to where we have come from our education institutions. We'll see there's a tremendous demand for education. Now, high global shortage of critical skills. There's a mismatch between the two. There's still a shortage of the critical skills needed. So there has to be some change in the kind of education and the level of technology. So there's rapid diffusion of innovation today because of technology, the rapid turnover of technology. The popularity of project-based learning is actually increasing. You'll hear more about it. We already saw a few hands raised. Then scope for more acceleration of PBL. Inclusion of PM, SDL, CL is absolutely essential going forward. So that would help us to create a robust and accelerated PBL model. And this model can be applied around the globe, starting with our own institutions and then moving on to other places, right from kindergarten all the way to postdoc studies. So I will just stop with this, and I want to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions or comments, let me know. How much time do we have? 5 minutes?
No time.
No time. Okay. So we have, thank you so much. I have my email address there, and this is in, can someone read this in Turkish for me? It says thank you in Turkish.